The twin suns of Xylaris Prime rose slowly over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. The capital city shimmered under their light, a city of towering crystal spires and floating platforms that stretched high into the clouds. Ships glided between the buildings, carrying passengers from one end of the sprawling metropolis to the other. In the heart of this city stood the Grand Palace, home to Queen Zira, ruler of the Xylaris Empire, known across galaxies for her wisdom, beauty, and strength. This morning, however, the palace buzzed with unusual energy. Guards whispered among themselves, and servants hurried back and forth, carrying orders from the queen. The reason was simple. Today, Ethan, a human from a distant world called Earth, was to formally arrive at the palace as Zira's husband. Humans were considered primitive by most alien species. They had no advanced space fleets, no sophisticated weaponry, and no empire to speak of. Yet Queen Zira had chosen one as her partner. The news alone had sent waves of shock and curiosity across her court. As the grand entrance doors opened, a tall, calm figure walked through. Ethan was dressed in simple, clean clothes, not the kind of elaborate uniform or ceremonial armor expected at the palace. His eyes were a calm blue, and his posture showed quiet confidence. The aliens watching him could not hide their surprise. They expected someone weak or clumsy, but this human moved with purpose and grace. Zira stood on the central balcony overlooking the entrance. Her long, silvery hair shimmered in the morning light. She had chosen him not just for curiosity or novelty, but because she saw something unusual in him, something that others could not. She wanted someone who could match her mind, who could challenge her, who could be a partner in more than name. Ethan stopped in front of the palace guards and gave a polite nod. "Good morning," he said in the universal language, his voice calm but firm. There was no hesitation, no nervousness. A hush fell over the guards and onlookers. They had expected fear or awe, but instead, this human seemed ordinary, yet quietly commanding. A senior guard, a tall alien named Tavor, stepped forward. His scales glimmered green and gold, and his 4 eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Human," he said, his voice sharp. "You enter the palace of Queen Zira, speak your purpose." Ethan smiled faintly. "I am here to honor my promise to the queen. I am here as her husband, and as her partner." His calm tone made Tavor blink. Most humans would have trembled under the gaze of such a high-ranking alien, but Ethan stood firm. The council of advisors, watching from the gallery above, whispered among themselves. Some were concerned, some curious. How could a human, a species so small and weak by their standards, be the mate of the great Queen Zira? Zira descended from the balcony and walked toward Ethan. Her movements were fluid and elegant, radiating authority. "Ethan," she said, her voice warm but commanding, "you have traveled far to be here. Welcome to Xylaris Prime." Ethan bowed respectfully. "Thank you, my queen. It is an honor to be here." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The queen's attendants and advisors exchanged glances. Some tried to hide their doubt, others did not. But Zira did not hesitate. She saw in him not just a human, but someone who carried a quiet strength, someone who could handle the pressures of life at the palace. The first days were filled with introductions and lessons. Ethan had to learn the customs, the hierarchy, and the expectations of the court. The palace was unlike anything he had ever seen on Earth. Rooms that floated, gardens with plants that shimmered and sang softly, corridors of crystal that reflected light in dazzling patterns. Every moment was a test of his patience and observation. Ethan, however, adapted quickly. He noticed small things that others overlooked, the way a door would close if left too long, the patterns of guard rotations, the subtle moods of the court members. He did not speak much, but he observed everything. The more he learned, the more respect Zira had for him. She could see that beneath his quiet demeanor, he was far from ordinary. Meanwhile, some members of the court attempted subtle tests. One evening, in a grand dining hall, a council member challenged Ethan. "Human," he said, trying to sound clever, "how do you expect to live among us? You have no power, no skills, no influence. Surely you will fail." Ethan smiled, calm and confident. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but I can learn. And sometimes, what seems weak at first can surprise those who judge too quickly." The council member scoffed, expecting laughter or confusion, but Ethan's words hung in the air. Zira watched him, her eyes narrowing slightly, intrigued. She had chosen a human not because of what they could see on the surface, but because she sensed something deeper. Something powerful, yet restrained. Days passed, and small, strange incidents began to happen. Ethan would solve minor logistical problems effortlessly. A malfunctioning hover platform would suddenly operate smoothly after he touched it. A disagreement among advisors would resolve itself after he suggested a simple compromise. Nothing magical or impossible, just careful observation, logic, and calm thinking. Yet the aliens whispered, "This human is unusual." One afternoon, Queen Zyra led Ethan on a tour of the Imperial Archives, a vast library containing knowledge from countless worlds. The corridors were lined with floating data spheres, each containing years of information. "Here," she said, "we store everything our empire has learned. Few humans would even know where to begin." Ethan walked carefully among the spheres, his eyes scanning quickly. "The order of storage is logical," he remarked. "If reorganized slightly, the search for key information could be much faster." Zira raised an eyebrow. None of her advisors had noticed the inefficiency, but Ethan had. The Queen smiled. "You notice everything. That is rare." Ethan shrugged lightly. "I just pay attention. It seems wise to learn from everything around me." As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's calm confidence and sharp mind began to impress even the most skeptical members of the court. Guards whispered about his reflexes, how he moved quickly to prevent accidents, how he anticipated problems before they arose. Scientists were intrigued by his natural curiosity, his way of understanding complex technology without formal training. Despite all this, Ethan remained humble. He never boasted. He never tried to outshine Zira. Instead, he supported her quietly, offering advice only when it was truly needed. Zira noticed this, and she felt a growing admiration for her husband. Here was someone who could match her mind, not through arrogance, but through thought, observation, and careful action. One evening, during a ceremonial feast, the palace was filled with dignitaries from neighboring planets. The mood was tense, as some alien leaders still doubted humans. A minor incident occurred when a hovering serving platform malfunctioned, sending trays of food spinning dangerously toward the guests. Before anyone could react, Ethan leapt forward, steadying the platform with a calm hand and saving the situation. The hall erupted in quiet astonishment. Queen Zyra's eyes widened. Even her most experienced guards had not reacted so quickly. She leaned close to Ethan and whispered, "You are full of surprises, human." Ethan smiled faintly. "I try my best, my queen." As night fell, the palace grew quiet. Ethan stood on the balcony beside Zyra, looking out over the city. "Your people are remarkable," he said softly, "but there is tension. I can feel it. Something is coming." Zyra's eyes narrowed. "Yes," she admitted. "Not all are pleased with our alliance. Some factions in the Empire believe humans are unworthy, weak, or dangerous. They do not yet understand what you are." Ethan's expression remained calm. "Then we will show them, not through words, but through action." For the first time, Zira felt a thrill. She had expected to train, guide, and perhaps test this human. But instead, she realized he might teach her, and her empire, something entirely new. And so the stage was set. Ethan's presence at the palace was no longer just a curiosity or political choice. It was a promise of change, of challenge, and of the unexpected strength that lay within humanity. Even the queen herself could not predict how far this human would go. Little did Zira know the arrival of her human husband was only the beginning. Shadows were already moving across the empire. Forces both within and outside the palace were watching, waiting, and planning. And when the time came, Ethan's true power would no longer be hidden behind calm blue eyes and quiet words. It would shine for all to see, and the universe would take notice. The twin suns set, casting the palace in warm orange light. Queen Zira looked at Ethan standing quietly beside her, and realized that perhaps humans were not as fragile as her people believed. Perhaps, in the quiet confidence of one man, there was a power that could change the course of empires. And so, the human husband had arrived. But his journey and his impact was only just beginning. The morning air on Xylaris Prime was crisp and fresh, carrying a faint hum from the floating city above the palace. Ethan had been at the palace for nearly a month, and already he had begun to learn the rhythm of life in the grand halls. Every door, every corridor, every glowing panel had a purpose, and he observed them all with careful attention. Queen Zira had begun to trust him more openly. She noticed the subtle ways he analyzed situations, his calm patience, and the careful thought behind every action. For the first time in her long reign, she felt as though she had a partner who could match her mind. She watched him often, sometimes from the balcony, sometimes quietly from the side of a gathering, noting how he moved through the palace without fear or confusion. The court, however, remained skeptical. Many advisors whispered behind closed doors, questioning why the queen had chosen a human. "He is clever," one elder remarked, "but cleverness alone cannot save an empire." Yet, despite their doubts, Ethan continued his quiet work, never confronting them, never boasting, only observing and learning. One day, a minor crisis tested him more than any ceremony or protocol could. A hydrolift, a massive transport system that carried resources from the lower levels of the city to the palace, had malfunctioned. Supplies were stuck mid-air, and panic was beginning to rise among the palace staff. The engineers were running around in confusion, arguing over which controls to use. A senior technician shouted, "We need the main power override. Activate the emergency sequence." But his instructions only caused more delays. Ethan walked calmly to the control panel. His eyes scanned the complex symbols and glowing circuits. The technicians froze, unsure if he should touch anything. "May I?" he asked softly. One technician stepped aside reluctantly. "I suppose, but be careful, human. One wrong move and it could all collapse." Ethan's fingers moved over the controls with precision. He did not need a translator. His observations and logic guided him. Within moments, the hydrolift hummed back to life, slowly moving the stalled cargo to its destination. The technicians blinked in astonishment. Not only had he fixed the problem, but he had done so without disrupting any of the delicate systems. Queen Zira, observing from above, allowed herself a small smile. She descended to the hall and placed a hand lightly on Ethan's shoulder. "You are remarkable," she said quietly, so only he could hear. Ethan shrugged modestly. "I only looked carefully. Sometimes problems are simpler than they appear." Even the court members who had doubted him were beginning to murmur in surprise. They had expected a human to falter in such a complex environment. Instead, Ethan had solved a problem that some of the Empire's best engineers struggled with. Over the next few days, subtle signs of Ethan's strength became more evident. During a training session with the palace guards, He displayed quick reflexes that allowed him to dodge and redirect a series of attacks. It was not that he was stronger than them physically, but his timing and awareness were uncanny. Guards who had been dismissive of humans began to watch him with new respect. He also demonstrated a unique approach to alien technology. During a lesson on holographic mapping systems, Ethan noticed inconsistencies in the projections. "If you adjust the calibration here," he said, pointing to a small panel, "the maps will align with actual planetary coordinates." The lead officer followed his suggestion, and the maps became perfectly accurate. Even minor actions carried a sense of purpose. Ethan would help servants organize deliveries more efficiently or suggest improvements to security protocols without challenging authority. His suggestions were logical, simple, and effective. Slowly, the whispers about his unusual capabilities spread throughout the palace. One evening, Queen Zira decided to test him in a more personal way. They walked together along the palace gardens, glowing plants swaying gently in the artificial breeze. "Ethan," she said, "do you ever worry that your people might not survive in this universe? That humans are too weak to compete?" Ethan paused, looking at the twin moons reflected in a crystalline pond. "I do not worry," he said finally. "Strength is not only measured by weapons or fleets. Humans survive because we adapt, we learn, and we find ways to turn challenges into advantages." Zira studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his words, only certainty. It was rare for anyone to speak so plainly and so wisely in her court. She felt a strange mixture of admiration and curiosity. Here was a human who understood not only her world, but the deeper idea of survival. Tavor, the senior guard, was harder to impress. He watched Ethan closely during every activity, testing him in subtle ways. One morning, he set up a simulated attack drill for the palace. Guards were to respond to an intruder breach, and Tavor watched how Ethan would act. Most humans would panic or hesitate. Ethan, however, remained calm. He observed the intruder's movements, anticipated the guards' positions, and suggested adjustments that allowed the team to respond faster and more efficiently. Tavor could not hide his surprise. "The human, he is more capable than I expected," he muttered to a fellow guard. Meanwhile, Ethan's interactions with Zira were growing deeper. They spent long hours discussing strategy, diplomacy, and the nature of leadership. She found herself fascinated by his way of thinking, how he could see patterns others overlooked, how he could remain calm in uncertainty, and how he approached problems from unexpected angles. It was during one such discussion that a new threat became apparent. Reports arrived of a rogue faction operating on the outskirts of the empire, challenging Zira's rule. The faction had advanced weaponry and a growing army, and the palace council was unsure how to respond. Zira considered calling a meeting with the generals, but Ethan spoke first. "The key to handling this threat," he said calmly, "is understanding what they value and how they make decisions. If we respond with the same tactics they expect, we will fight blindly. But if we think ahead, we can protect the palace and reduce casualties." The generals exchanged skeptical glances. Many had assumed humans lacked strategic thinking, but Ethan's words carried clarity and confidence. Zira nodded slightly. "Perhaps you can help us prepare," she said. Ethan spent the next days analyzing intelligence reports, reviewing maps, and observing military exercises. His insights were subtle, often small adjustments that made a large difference. Guards were repositioned to cover vulnerabilities. Communication protocols were improved to prevent confusion during attacks. Resource management was optimized to ensure supplies would last longer during conflicts. All of this, however, Ethan carried out quietly. He did not announce his actions to the court or demand recognition. He worked, learned, and adapted, letting his results speak for themselves. And slowly, those around him began to notice. Even in social situations, Ethan's presence had an effect. During a formal banquet, Diplomats from other planets observed him carefully. While many humans would fumble with alien customs, Ethan remained composed, engaging politely and respectfully. He asked insightful questions, offered clever suggestions, and maintained a calm dignity. Some aliens whispered that he carried himself like a seasoned leader, not a newcomer from a primitive world. Zyra watched him with pride. Here was a human who had proven that strength did not always come from physical might or advanced technology, but from observation, intelligence, and courage. She realized that in choosing him, she had chosen not only a partner, but a force that could reshape her empire in ways no one expected. As the weeks passed, subtle challenges continued to arise. A miscommunication among palace officials caused a near disaster in food distribution. Ethan calmly stepped in, identified the source of the error, and implemented a simple solution that prevented famine or unrest. Guards began to ask him for advice during training exercises. Scientists sought his input on new inventions. Even the palace council, initially skeptical, could not deny that the human possessed something extraordinary. One night, as the twin moons rose high over the city, Zyra and Ethan stood once again on the balcony. The wind carried the faint hum of the floating city below. "You are changing how my people see humans," Zyra said softly. Ethan looked out at the glowing horizon. "I do not seek to change them," he said. "I only seek to do my part, to help where I can. If they learn from it, that is their choice." Zyra smiled, a rare and genuine expression. She realized that the strength of this human lay not only in his skills or intelligence, but in his humility, patience, and calm courage. He did not try to dominate or impress. He simply acted with purpose, letting his actions speak louder than words. Little did anyone in the palace know, these subtle displays of strength were only the beginning. The rogue faction was gathering power, and the galaxy beyond Xylaris Prime was watching closely. When the time came, Ethan would need to reveal the full extent of his abilities, and the universe would witness a human unlike any other. For now, however, the human husband remained calm, observant, and quietly extraordinary, and Queen Zyra, standing beside him, could not help but feel a growing sense of anticipation. She had married not only a human, but a force that could one day astonish the galaxy. The stars above the palace twinkled in silent approval. Somewhere in the vast universe, forces were stirring. But here, in the heart of Xylaris Prime, a human man had begun to show that even the seemingly small and fragile could achieve greatness. And with that, the palace settled into night, unaware that the true test of Ethan's power was only just beginning. The calm of Xylaris Prime was beginning to fray. For weeks, intelligence reports had hinted at movement in the outer sectors of the Empire, a series of raids and attacks by a rogue faction that refused to recognize Queen Zyra's rule. These were not ordinary rebels. They were well-armed, organized, and ruthless, striking quickly before vanishing into the void. In the grand strategy room of the palace, Zyra stood over a floating map, its three-dimensional display showing the outer planets and fleets. Her advisors hovered around, discussing possible responses, but confusion and disagreement filled the air. "We must strike immediately," said one counselor, his tentacles gesturing sharply. "Their attacks will only grow stronger if we hesitate." "Reckless action could cost us the entire sector," another replied. "We must observe, understand, and plan." Zyra's eyes fell on Ethan. He stood quietly near the edge of the room, watching, listening, and analyzing. Unlike the others, he said nothing, but his calm presence drew the Queen's attention. "Ethan," Zyra said, her voice steady, "what do you think?" Ethan stepped forward and studied the display. His human eyes scanned patterns and alignments that the alien minds often overlooked. "Their attacks are not random," he said. "They are testing your defenses. They want to find weaknesses before committing to a full assault. If we respond too aggressively, we risk falling into traps. The advisors whispered among themselves. Many of them had never considered that the enemy might have strategy beyond brute force. Zira nodded. Then we must respond carefully, she said. Over the next few days, Ethan began to quietly assist in preparations. He analyzed patrol routes, studied fleet movements, and suggested adjustments to defensive systems. He did not issue orders, and he did not demand recognition. His insights, however, were precise and effective. During a patrol exercise, he noticed a minor flaw in the palace shield network. One section did not fully cover the outer walls during low power cycles. If they notice this, he warned a senior engineer, they could exploit it. It is a small gap, but enough to allow infiltration. The engineer hesitated, unsure of the human's understanding of alien technology. But when Ethan guided him step by step, the gap was sealed quickly and efficiently. Guards who observed the process were astonished. The human had no formal training in their technology, yet he understood it better than most specialists. Meanwhile, spies in the outer sectors reported increased activity by the rogue faction. Small ships carrying weapons and troops moved closer to the border planets. The Empire's fleet prepared to respond, but hesitation lingered. The generals were cautious, unwilling to commit to battle without clear intelligence. Ethan suggested a subtle approach. "We can create a controlled simulation," he explained. "Let them believe we are weaker than we are. We can study their tactics and choose the right moment to strike. A direct attack now could be disastrous." Zira considered his words. She had faced countless challenges before, but there was a clarity in Ethan's voice, a combination of caution and foresight that she had rarely seen. "Very well," she said. "We will follow your plan." The first signs of the rogue faction's strength came quickly. A fleet of sleek black ships appeared near a border planet, firing warning shots at the colonies there. Panic spread among the citizens. Reports of damaged facilities and injured workers reached the palace. Ethan remained calm. He studied the reports and analyzed the trajectories of the attacks. "They are testing response times," he said. "Notice the pattern. They retreat before the defenses can fully respond. They are not here to conquer yet. They are learning." He proposed a countermeasure. Small defense teams would simulate vulnerability, allowing the rogue faction to believe they were weak. Meanwhile, surveillance drones would track their movements, recording every action. The plan was risky, and the generals were uneasy. "If they realized the deception," one said, "they could strike harder, faster, and cause massive destruction." Ethan nodded. "Yes, but if we do nothing, they will strike anyway, untested and potentially stronger than before. This way, we control the flow of information. We learn, and we prepare." Queen Zira watched him with growing admiration. Here was a human who understood strategy not through numbers or fleets alone, but through observation, psychology, and prediction. She realized that his strength was not brute force. It was insight, patience, and a mind that could see the hidden patterns of conflict. The first encounter with the rogue faction under Ethan's guidance was a tense affair. Small squads of alien ships engaged the invaders in what seemed like chaotic skirmishes, but Ethan had directed every move. He had anticipated the faction's attacks and positioned forces where they could respond efficiently. When the rogue ships advanced toward a vulnerable supply station, Ethan's predictions proved correct. Hidden defensive drones activated, neutralizing the attackers before they could inflict serious damage. The rogue faction retreated, confused and frustrated. Zira was astonished. The humans' influence had turned what could have been a disaster into a controlled encounter. For the first time, the court began to murmur, not in doubt, but in cautious respect. As days turned into weeks, Ethan's influence became more evident. He coordinated communications between planets, optimized patrol routes, and even trained select teams of soldiers in tactics that combined alien technology with human ingenuity. The rogue faction continued to test the Empire, but each time they failed to achieve their goals. Even Tavor, the senior guard who had been skeptical, admitted quietly to himself, "The human is remarkable. His mind is unlike any I have ever seen." Ethan's calm demeanor became a symbol of stability within the palace. Citizens and soldiers alike began to notice him during inspections. Unlike other leaders who shouted or demanded obedience, Ethan inspired confidence simply by being present, analyzing, and acting efficiently. One evening, after another skirmish, Ethan and Queen Zyra walked along the palace balcony. The city lights reflected on the surface of floating waterways, and the twin moons cast a soft glow over the gardens below. "They are testing us more than ever now," Zyra said, her voice tinged with concern. "I fear this rogue faction will soon strike directly at the palace." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "They will try, yes. But we are prepared. We have learned their patterns, their weaknesses, and their timing. And if they strike at us directly, we will be ready." Zyra looked at him, a mixture of admiration and astonishment in her eyes. "You do not even appear afraid," she said. "I am not fearless," Ethan replied quietly. "I simply refuse to panic. Panic does not solve problems. Observation and preparation do." The queen realized then that the calmness she saw in him was not mere luck. It was discipline, intelligence, and an innate ability to understand threats before they arrived. She had always faced dangers in her reign, but never had she seen someone respond with such quiet, unwavering confidence. Over the following days, Ethan continued to demonstrate subtle but powerful abilities. He coordinated supply lines, identified hidden weaknesses in fortress defenses, and even proposed diplomatic strategies to prevent neighboring systems from joining the rogue faction. Each action reinforced the growing respect and admiration within the palace. Then came the first direct attack on Xylaris Prime. The rogue faction's fleet approached in numbers far greater than expected. Alarms sounded across the palace, and citizens braced for battle. The generals scrambled to organize defenses, but confusion threatened to delay action. Ethan stepped forward. "Do not panic," he said. "Follow the plan. Position the defense drones here, move patrol ships there, and maintain communication. If we act precisely, we can defend the palace without unnecessary loss." His instructions were clear, concise, and logical. Soldiers who had once doubted him now followed every command. Slowly, the initial chaos transformed into coordinated defense. The rogue fleet attacked, firing beams of energy and launching boarding pods. But every move they made was anticipated. Drones intercepted attacks, patrol ships blocked critical paths, and supply routes remained intact. The invaders were frustrated, unable to breach the palace defenses. Zyra observed the battle from the strategy room, her heart pounding. She had known Ethan was clever, but seeing him coordinate such a complex defense in real time was astonishing. "You are truly extraordinary," she whispered, almost to herself. Ethan did not boast. He remained focused, adjusting movements, predicting enemy reactions, and ensuring that every part of the defense functioned flawlessly. Slowly, the rogue fleet began to retreat, unable to achieve their objective. The first direct test of his abilities had succeeded. After the battle, the Palace Council could no longer deny Ethan's skill. Even the most skeptical generals and advisors admitted that the human had saved the palace from disaster. Murmurs of awe and respect spread through the halls. Queen Zyra approached him later that evening. "I must confess," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I did not fully understand your abilities before. You are exceptional, Ethan." He smiled faintly. I only acted as I thought best. The Empire's strength is in its people, and I wish only to help protect them." Zira nodded, feeling a mixture of pride, admiration, and growing love. Here was a human who had not only survived in her world, but had begun to prove that humanity was capable of more than anyone had imagined. Outside the palace, the twin moons rose higher, casting light on a city still recovering from its first real test. The rogue faction had retreated, but they would return. When they did, Ethan's full abilities would be tested further. And when that moment came, the Queen knew that she had a partner unlike any other, a human who could change the course of empires not through strength alone, but through intelligence, courage, and unwavering calm. For now, the palace slept, but the seeds of change had been sown. The human husband had begun to show his true potential, and the Empire would never see him, or humanity, the same way again. The horizon over Xylaris Prime glowed red as the first signs of the rogue fleet appeared. Thousands of ships, black and sleek, advanced toward the capital with terrifying speed. The sky above the floating city was soon filled with streaks of energy as warning beams lit the atmosphere. Sirens echoed through the crystal corridors of the palace, and citizens scrambled to safety. Queen Zira stood in the grand strategy room, her hands gripping the railing of the floating command platform. Around her, advisors and generals shouted over the chaos, debating which defensive strategy to use. Panic was creeping in, something rare in her court. Ethan remained calm. He observed the rogue fleet, studied their formation, and noted patterns that others missed. His blue eyes moved quickly from one display to another, calculating trajectories, timing, and possible weaknesses. "They've changed their approach," he said quietly. "This is no longer a test. They intend to destroy the palace and destabilize the entire empire." Zira's heart tightened. She had prepared for smaller attacks, skirmishes, and probing strikes. But this fleet was enormous, far more than anyone had anticipated. Generals began shouting about fleet reinforcements and defensive grids, but Ethan's voice cut through the noise. "Follow my instructions exactly," he said. "Positions, timing, and movement must be precise. If we act as I say, we will neutralize their advance. Chaos is what they expect. We give them order." His words carried calm authority. Guards, officers, and soldiers followed him without hesitation. For the first time, many realized that the human's quiet confidence was not arrogance, it was mastery. The battle began in full force. Energy beams lit the sky as the rogue fleet launched volleys of attacks. The palace shield glowed with power, absorbing initial strikes, but gaps began to appear under pressure. Sensors warned of incoming boarding pods aimed at the central towers. Ethan acted immediately. He coordinated drones and patrol ships with a speed and precision that left alien officers astonished. "Intercept here! Block that corridor! Redirect the shields now!" His orders were concise, clear, and executed flawlessly. Aliens who had doubted him watched in amazement as a human commanded a defense more sophisticated than many of their trained generals could manage. Patrol ships moved with perfect timing. Drones intercepted enemy craft, and defensive beams targeted weak points before the attackers could exploit them. As the battle escalated, Ethan's true abilities began to shine. He anticipated enemy maneuvers, adjusting defenses before strikes were launched. When a rogue commander attempted a feint to distract the palace forces, Ethan predicted it and positioned reinforcements in the correct locations. The attackers' plan failed, and chaos turned against them. Queen Zira, standing beside him, could not hide her astonishment. "You see everything?" she whispered. "Every move, every weakness. They are visible to you." Ethan did not boast. He simply responded with calm clarity. Observation and analysis, and knowing the value of timing. They cannot hide patterns completely. They reveal themselves by their choices. The rogue fleet, realizing their attacks were less effective than anticipated, escalated the assault. A massive wave of ships aimed directly at the palace, using advanced weapons designed to pierce shields. Panic rippled through the palace once more. Ethan acted swiftly. He redirected defensive energy, adjusted patrol ships into protective formations, and deployed hidden countermeasures that the rogue fleet had never seen. Alien soldiers whispered in awe as drones intercepted energy beams, deflecting them safely while returning fire with calculated precision. Boarding pods attempted to penetrate the palace walls, but Ethan's strategic positioning of elite guards stopped them immediately. Each move was deliberate, each action precise. The invaders could not gain ground, and frustration began to show in their ranks. Tavor, the senior guard who had doubted Ethan before, now watched with wide eyes. "He is more than any of us imagined," he muttered to a fellow officer. "Not just clever, he is extraordinary." Ethan's mind worked at a speed that seemed almost inhuman. He calculated the trajectory of every ship, the timing of every attack, and the response of every defense system. He did not act recklessly. Every decision was deliberate, minimizing risk and maximizing impact. During the height of the battle, a massive strike threatened the central palace tower, the heart of the city's power grid. If it were destroyed, the shields would collapse. The rogue fleet had anticipated weakness, and the palace could have fallen in moments. Ethan acted immediately. He calculated the trajectory of the incoming strike and directed a combination of drones, patrol ships, and energy shields to intercept. The strike hit a precisely timed counterforce, dispersing its energy harmlessly into the atmosphere. The palace remained unscathed. The council and generals stared in disbelief. No one had expected a human to orchestrate such a flawless defense. They realized that the invaders were not facing ordinary soldiers. They were facing a mind capable of predicting, adapting, and controlling chaos with precision. Queen Zira stepped closer to Ethan, her eyes shining. "You are not only clever, you are powerful in a way I have never seen," she said. Ethan's expression remained calm, almost modest. "I do not seek power. I seek only to protect what is important. That is what humans do. We adapt, we fight, we survive." The rogue fleet attempted one final maneuver, a coordinated strike at multiple points along the palace's outer walls. Ethan anticipated it before the ships even moved. Using a combination of prediction and observation, he positioned patrols and defensive energy beams so that every strike was met with a counter. The invaders' attacks were neutralized one by one, their fleet faltering under a defense they could not understand. By the time the suns had set over Xylaris Prime, the rogue fleet was in full retreat. They had failed, suffering losses that would take months to recover from. The palace, its citizens, and its defenses remained intact. For the first time, the court and the generals saw the full measure of Ethan's abilities. It was not just his calm, his intelligence, or his strategic mind. It was the combination of all these qualities, applied with precision under pressure. Soldiers who had doubted humans whispered among themselves. "He is not like any human we have ever imagined," one said. "He is beyond ordinary." The queen approached him later that night, the battle lights still flickering across the city. "Ethan," she said softly, "you have done what none of my advisors or generals could have achieved. You have saved the palace and the empire." Ethan looked at her, his expression calm but determined. "I did what needed to be done," he replied. "The empire is strong because of its people, and because you lead wisely. I only helped them see what was possible when planning carefully and acting decisively." Zira studied him closely. She had married a human expecting novelty, curiosity, and perhaps charm, but what she had found was extraordinary courage, insight, and intelligence that could rival even the greatest minds in her empire. She realized fully and clearly that her husband was not only remarkable, He was a force that could shape the future. The aftermath of the battle brought reflection and respect. The court formally acknowledged Ethan's role, and whispers of his abilities spread across the city. Soldiers, citizens, and even distant allies began to see that humans, long underestimated, could possess strength beyond their expectations. Ethan, however, remained modest. He did not seek accolades or praise. He worked quietly, ensuring that the palace defenses remained strong, helping citizens recover from the attacks and guiding the next steps in preparation for any future threats. Queen Zira, watching him, felt a mix of admiration, pride, and awe. She had expected to lead a human through her world, but instead she found someone who could teach, guide, and protect in ways she had never imagined. The twin moons rose over Xylaris Prime, their light reflecting on the crystal towers. The palace was safe, for now. The rogue faction had retreated, but Ethan had shown that humans were not to be underestimated. The universe had yet to see his full potential, but one thing was clear. The human husband of the alien queen had revealed a power that stunned even the most powerful beings in the Empire. As the city settled into a cautious calm, Ethan stood beside Zira on the balcony, looking at the horizon. "This was only the beginning," he said quietly. Zira nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars. "I know," she replied, "and I will face every challenge with you by my side." Together they looked out over the city they had defended, knowing that even greater tests lay ahead. The Empire had witnessed the first full display of Ethan's abilities, and the galaxy would soon learn that the humans, once dismissed as weak, could stand among the strongest. And in that quiet moment, as the stars blinked above and the city shimmered below, the Queen understood fully what she had discovered. Her human husband was not only extraordinary, he was a force that could change the universe. The skies over Xylaris Prime had cleared, leaving the twin suns shining bright and warm over the floating city. The rogue faction had retreated to distant sectors, licking their wounds and reconsidering their plans. Yet the palace and its citizens remained on high alert. Queen Zira walked through the grand corridors, her mind busy with rebuilding, reorganization, and security improvements. But her thoughts often returned to Ethan, her human husband. Over the weeks since the major attack, his calm confidence, intelligence, and subtle power had become impossible to ignore. He had not only saved the palace and the Empire, but he had also transformed the perception of humans across the Xylaris Empire. Ethan, as always, moved quietly through the palace. While generals and advisors strategized, he studied reports, reviewed training exercises, and offered small but critical insights. No task was too minor for his attention, yet nothing escaped his notice. Even in simple daily routines, his presence inspired confidence and respect. The first major step toward peace came when Ethan suggested reaching out to neighboring systems. "Many planets are undecided about whom to follow," he explained. "Some may support the rogue faction simply because they do not know the strength and wisdom of your leadership. We need to show them the Empire is stable and prepared." Zira nodded. "And you believe humans can help with diplomacy?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "Humans excel in adaptation. They find ways to communicate and understand others. Sometimes it is not technology or weapons that persuade. It is patience, observation, and trust. Together they devised a plan. Envoys from the Empire would visit nearby systems, demonstrating not only the strength of Xylaris Prime, but also its willingness to protect and collaborate. Ethan accompanied some of these missions, quietly advising on interactions, predicting potential conflicts, and suggesting ways to resolve disagreements peacefully. Back at the palace, the citizens were beginning to notice a change. Guards, previously skeptical of humans, now watched Ethan with respect. Scientists and engineers sought his input on new projects, marveling at his insight. Even the palace council, initially critical and doubtful, began to acknowledge the depth of his understanding. One day, as the palace gardens shimmered under the warm sun, Zira observed Ethan quietly helping a group of young cadets with tactical exercises. The children were learning coordination, timing, and observation, the same qualities Ethan had demonstrated throughout the battles. He did not show off or demand attention. He simply guided, corrected gently, and encouraged them. The queen approached him. "You are changing the future of my empire," she said softly. Ethan looked up from the cadets, his expression calm. "I am only helping those willing to learn. The Empire's strength has always been its people. I simply show what is possible when one thinks carefully and acts with purpose." Zira felt a deep sense of admiration. Here was a human who did not rely on brute force, advanced technology, or intimidation. His power was quiet, deliberate, and profound. He inspired others simply by showing what was achievable through intelligence, courage, and observation. Meanwhile, the rogue faction remained a looming threat. Reports arrived that they were rebuilding their forces, planning new attacks, and attempting to destabilize border worlds. Yet every move they made was carefully predicted by Ethan. He analyzed patterns, anticipated strategies, and suggested preventive measures that kept colonies safe and the Empire secure. It was during one critical moment that Ethan's full power became undeniable. A fleet of rogue ships attempted a surprise strike on a distant colony. Communication lines had been sabotaged, and the defenders were unprepared. Yet Ethan, studying reports and trajectories, anticipated the attack. Using a combination of small patrol ships, defensive drones, and coordinated alerts, he guided the defenders to intercept the invaders before they could land. The battle was swift but decisive. The rogue fleet suffered heavy losses, and the colony remained intact. Soldiers and citizens alike marveled at how a human, someone they had once considered weak, had saved them. Messages of gratitude and respect spread across the Empire, elevating Ethan's reputation even further. Queen Zira watched from the command platform, a mix of pride and astonishment on her face. She approached Ethan after the reports came in. "You have done more than protect the palace. You have strengthened the entire Empire," she said. Ethan's gaze remained calm. "I only acted as I thought best. Strength lies in preparation, awareness, and action when it matters most. Humans have always survived by learning quickly and adapting. I am only showing that." The days turned into weeks, and Xylaris Prime began to rebuild. Ethan worked alongside the engineers, scientists, and military leaders, refining defenses, improving communication networks, and training new leaders. He inspired confidence without demanding it, proving that human ingenuity could match, even surpass, the greatest minds in the Empire. Even the citizens began to see the difference. Children whispered stories about the human who could predict attacks, save entire colonies, and guide the Empire with quiet strength. Soldiers shared tales of his calm presence in the middle of chaos. For the first time, humans were no longer considered primitive. They were seen as capable, clever, and strong. One evening, Zira and Ethan walked through the palace gardens, the twin moons casting a gentle glow over the crystalline structures. The air was filled with the soft hum of floating gardens and the peaceful chatter of citizens enjoying the calm. "You have changed everything," Zira said quietly, her eyes fixed on him. Ethan looked at the stars above. "I only helped show what is possible," he replied. "The Empire has always been strong. I only helped it see what it could achieve with careful planning and courage." Zira reached out and took his hand. "You have shown them and me that humans are not to be underestimated. You are extraordinary in ways I never imagined." Ethan smiled, though modestly. "Extraordinary or not, I will always act to protect what matters. That is all any of us can do." The next few months solidified Ethan's reputation. Plans for new colonies, trade agreements, and defensive strategies were all improved by his insight. The Empire began to expand its influence not through force alone, but through careful diplomacy, strategy, and collaboration. Lessons learned from the human who had come to live among them. Even the rogue faction, observing from afar, began to change their opinion. Reports of Ethan's abilities spread through enemy ranks, inspiring caution, fear, and respect. They realized they were no longer fighting ordinary humans, but a mind capable of anticipating, adapting, and countering every move with precision. Within the palace, life returned to a sense of normalcy, though the memory of recent battles lingered. Citizens, soldiers, and officials treated Ethan with respect, and many sought his guidance. Yet he remained humble, focused on learning, helping, and preparing for future challenges. Zyra often reflected on the extraordinary nature of her husband. She had married a human expecting curiosity, charm, and novelty, but she had found courage, insight, intelligence, and unwavering calm. He had proven that even a single human could alter the course of empires, inspire loyalty, and earn respect across a galaxy that had long underestimated them. One evening, as they watched the twin moons rise together, Zyra spoke softly. "Ethan, you have changed not only my view of humans, but the view of the entire empire. What you have done will be remembered for generations." Ethan looked at her, calm and steady. "I only did what was necessary. The Empire's strength is its people, and I have only tried to help them see what they can achieve. Humans survive by learning, adapting, and acting when it matters most. That is all I have done." Zyra smiled, feeling a profound sense of pride. She realized that the partnership between a human and an alien queen could do more than unite species. It could reshape the destiny of worlds. The citizens of Xylaris Prime celebrated a festival in honor of the restored peace. Ethan moved quietly among them, guiding children in games of strategy, advising young soldiers, and offering insights to curious scientists. No display of power was needed. His presence alone inspired admiration and respect. Stories of his actions during the rogue fleet attacks spread across the Empire, solidifying his legacy. Humans were no longer seen as weak or primitive. They were capable, clever, and courageous, qualities long undervalued by other species. Even the Palace Council, who had once doubted him, now openly praised Ethan. Generals consulted him before planning maneuvers. Scientists sought his advice for new inventions. Guards credited him with saving lives and inspiring discipline. And Queen Zyra, more than anyone, knew that she had chosen not only a partner, but a force that could change the universe. As night fell, the twin moons reflected on the palace towers, casting long shadows over the floating city. Ethan and Zyra stood together on the balcony, looking out over the empire they had protected and strengthened. "You have shown them what humans can do," Zyra said softly. Ethan's calm blue eyes met hers. "I only helped them see what is possible when one thinks carefully, acts bravely, and never gives up. Humans have always survived by learning and adapting. I have only shown what they can achieve." Zyra took his hand. "And that will inspire generations. They will never underestimate humans again." Ethan smiled faintly, humble but proud. "Then my work is done. For now. The Empire is strong and its people are capable. That is all that matters." The stars above Xylaris Prime twinkled as if in agreement. The rogue faction had retreated, peace had returned, and the Empire looked toward a future brighter than ever. And in the heart of it all, a human, calm, clever, courageous, had proven that even a single individual could change the fate of worlds. The legacy of Ethan, the human husband of the alien queen, would be remembered across the galaxy. He had shown that humanity, once dismissed as weak and primitive, could stand alongside the strongest species, inspire respect, and change the course of history. And as the twin moons cast their glow over the city, Queen Zira knew one thing for certain. She had chosen a partner unlike any other, a human whose courage, intelligence, and quiet strength had stunned not only her, but the entire universe. The future was bright. The Empire was strong, and humanity had earned its place among the stars.